They came to the silent desert canyon seeking ancient history, but found a massive modern-day crime scene instead. A father and son, alone in the wilderness, had stumbled upon a secret people would kill to protect. They almost escaped unnoticed until one misstep shattered the silence. The deafening crash of pottery didn't just break artifacts, it painted a target on their backs. Now, hunted by ruthless criminals in a stone maze, their only hope for survival isn't a weapon, but the sharp instincts of their loyal German Shepherd, Wolf. The deeper they trekked into the remote slot canyons of the New Mexico high desert, the more profound the silence became. It was a vast, ancient quiet, unbroken by modern life, where the only sounds were the crunch of their boots on sun-baked sandstone and the soft panting of the dog. Jake led the way, a rugged man in his late 40s with weathered skin akin to worn leather and watchful, intelligent eyes that constantly scanned the horizon. He wore practical, dust-covered hiking gear and carried a heavy pack with practiced ease. Behind him walked his teenage son, Leo, lanky and curious, wiping sweat from his forehead under the brim of his hat. Leo was eager to find the ancient petroglyphs his father had promised, hidden history etched into the canyon walls. Trotting ahead of them, acting as both scout and guardian, was Wolf. He was a magnificent 5-year-old German Shepherd with a unique silver sable coat that blended seamlessly with the pale desert rock. Loyal to his core and possessing a sharp intelligence, Wolf was usually the picture of disciplined energy. Suddenly, Wolf stopped dead in his tracks. The rhythmic sound of his movement ceased, causing Jake to halt immediately and hold up a hand to stop Leo. Wolf stood rigid, his body tense. A low ripple of fur along his spine, his hackles, began to rise slightly. This was not a reaction to a rabbit or a lizard. It was a sign of deep unease. The dog tipped his head, his large ears swiveling like radar dishes, trying to locate something unseen. Then, Wolf began to sneeze violently, shaking his head rapidly. He pawed at his nose in irritation. Jake knelt beside the dog, his own senses on high alert. The air here should have been pure, dry, and smelling only of sagebrush and heated rock. Instead, beneath the scent of the dust that was irritating Wolf, Jake caught a faint, impossible odor. It was the acrid, oily stench of diesel engine exhaust carried on the thin breeze from somewhere nearby. "Dad, what is it?" Leo whispered, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Something that shouldn't be here," Jake murmured. Trusting Wolf's instincts implicitly, Jake signaled for them to move off the main trail. They followed the dog's focused gaze toward a dense thicket of thorny mesquite bushes seemingly growing against a solid cliff face. As they approached with caution, Jake realized the brush was an artificial screen, cunningly arranged to hide a wide, dark opening in the rock. They pushed past the thorns and stepped inside the cave mouth. The sight that greeted them stole the breath from Jake's lungs. It was not a pristine archaeological site, but a crime scene of massive proportions. The cavern floor had been brutally excavated. Stacked in the shadows were hundreds of priceless Anasazi pottery vessels, ancient jars and bowls painted with intricate black and white geometric designs, all dug from their resting places and sitting in plastic crates, waiting to be stolen away forever. The silence of centuries had been broken by greed. Inside the cavern, the air was thick with the dust of centuries and the heavy realization of what they had found. Leo stood mesmerized, his heart pounding in his chest as his eyes took in the staggering amount of history piled haphazardly before him. There were hundreds of Anasazi pots, their intricate black and white geometrical designs perfectly preserved in the dry desert air, all stacked precariously in plastic crates. Overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the theft, Leo stepped backward to get a wider view, momentarily forgetting the bulky hiking pack strapped to his shoulders. He did not feel the slight resistance as his pack brushed against a tall, unstable tower of ancient ceramic bowls until it was too late. Gravity took hold, and the tower swayed before collapsing. The profound, ancient silence of the cave was violently shattered. The sound of priceless pottery cascading onto the unforgiving stone floor was deafening, a sharp, brittle cacophony of destruction that echoed thunderously off the cavern walls like a rockfall of glass. It was a noise that could not be undone. Before the last echo had even faded into the darkness, rough, angry voices erupted from deeper within the shadows of the mine excavation. "Who is out there?" a man bellowed, his voice raw with menace and surprise. Seconds later, another voice shouted over the commotion, "Find them! Get them! No witnesses!" The heavy thud of dropped metal tools rang out, followed immediately by the frantic pounding of heavy boots on rock rushing rapidly toward the cave entrance where Jake and his family stood exposed. Jake reacted instantly, pure survival instinct surging through his veins. There was no time for regret, only movement. He grabbed Leo's arm with a grip like iron, yanking his stunned son away from the scene of the accident. "Run, Wolf, go!" Jake commanded, his voice low and urgent. The Silver Sable German Shepherd did not hesitate. Wolf turned instantly, sprinting back towards the sliver of sunlight at the cave mouth. Jake and Leo were right behind him, bursting out of the cave just as the first angry shouts reached the entrance behind them. Jake did not head back down the open wash they had come from. Instead, he hauled Leo toward a dark fissure in the sandstone wall. It was the entrance to a slot canyon system, a crack in the earth barely wide enough for a single person. They dove into the shadows of the narrow maze, leaving the open desert behind for the claustrophobic safety of stone. The chase began instantly, but it was not a simple foot race. The grave robbers knew this terrain, and they had come prepared. From their hidden encampment near the cave, the aggressive roar of engines roared to life, tearing through the desert silence. Two men sped out on powerful four-wheel all-terrain vehicles, ATVs, kicking up clouds of red dust as they raced toward the wide, open washes that served as the main exits from the canyon system. Their plan was clear: cut off any escape route to the open desert. Simultaneously, the remaining members of the gang, armed with heavy metal crowbars and portable radios, fanned out on foot. They plunged into the labyrinth of narrow slot canyons, their shouts echoing and distorting off the high stone walls, making it sound as if they were coming from every direction at once. Jake, Leo, and Wolf were deep within the slot canyon now, a claustrophobic world where the towering, undulating walls of smooth red sandstone squeezed in on them, sometimes leaving barely enough room to walk single file. The sliver of blue sky above seemed impossibly distant. The air was cooler here, but the sense of entrapment was suffocating. The echoes were disorienting. The mechanical whine of the ATVs bounced off the canyon walls, creating a confusing cacophony that made it impossible for Jake to determine where the vehicles actually were. He stopped at a fork in the narrow path, momentarily paralyzed by indecision, not knowing which turn would lead them to safety and which would lead straight into a trap. He looked down at Wolf. The Silver Sable German Shepherd was not looking around in panic. Instead, the dog had pressed his body low to the sandy canyon floor, his head tilted, one ear pressed firmly against the ground. His other ear swiveled like a radar dish, catching sounds too faint for human ears. Wolf remained perfectly still for a long moment, his body a conduit for the vibrations traveling through the earth. Then he stood up decisively. He looked at Jake, let out a soft, urgent chuff, and pointed his muzzle confidently toward the left fork, the narrower, darker path. Jake understood instantly. The echoing noise in the air was a deception, but the ground did not lie. Wolf could feel the deep, rumbling tremors of the heavy ATVs approaching through the earth long before they were visible. He was tracking the true location of the threat through the vibrations in the stone itself. Trusting his companion implicitly, Jake grabbed Leo's hand and followed the dog into the left passage just as the sound of an approaching ATV grew louder from the direction of the right fork. They slipped into the shadows seconds before the vehicle roared past the opening they had almost taken. As the afternoon wore on, the desert sun beat down mercilessly on the canyon rims above, turning the stone maze into an oven. The heat inside the narrow slots began to rise, radiating from the rock walls. Jake knew the danger of heat exhaustion was now as real as the men hunting them. He forced them to stop periodically in shallow alcoves that offered momentary shade. He rationed their dwindling water supply strictly, allowing Leo only small, controlled sips to wet his parched throat, watching anxiously as the boy's face flushed with exertion and heat. They were alive, but the desert was beginning to tighten its grip. The sun, which had been their merciless tormentor all afternoon, finally dipped below the jagged horizon, painting the desert sky in dramatic streaks of violet and blood orange before plunging the world into darkness. Almost instantly, the punishing heat evaporated into the thin, high-altitude air, replaced by a biting, aggressive cold that seeped through their thin clothing. The temperature plummeted from a scorching 40 degrees Celsius to near freezing in a matter of hours, a brutal reminder of the desert's extreme nature. They had no choice but to stop. Moving in the pitch black of the slot canyons without light was a recipe for a broken ankle, or worse. Jake found a small, shallow alcove carved by wind and water into the base of a sandstone cliff. It offered some protection from the rising wind, but little else. They huddled together in the cramped space, their bodies pressed close to share what little warmth they had. Leo, exhausted and overwhelmed by the day's events, sat with his knees pulled up to his chest, shivering violently. His teeth chattered, a sharp clicking sound in the quiet night. The weight of his mistake hung heavily on him. "Dad, I'm sorry," Leo whispered, his voice trembling with cold and fear. "It's all my fault. If I hadn't knocked over those pots." Jake reached into his first aid kit and retrieved a small bandage. He gently cleaned a shallow scratch on Leo's arm, a souvenir from their mad dash through the thorny brush earlier. Then he wrapped his arm tightly around his son's shoulders, pulling him closer. "Listen to me, Leo," Jake said, his voice firm but calm in the darkness. "Fear is natural. It's a survival instinct. But panic is what gets you killed. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters now is not what happened, but how we handle it. We stay calm. We stay together. And we use our heads." As if sensing the boy's distress and physical need, Wolf moved from his position at the entrance of the alcove. The large German Shepherd curled his powerful body tightly against Leo's side, draping his heavy head over the boy's lap. The dog's thick silver sable fur acted as a living blanket, his body heat radiating into Leo, steadily warming him and stilling his shivers. From their hiding place, Jake kept watch. Through a narrow opening in the rocks, he could see the distant, sweeping beams of high-powered flashlights cutting through the night sky and dancing across the canyon walls. The men were still out there, methodically searching the darkness, their presence a constant, menacing reminder that the danger had not passed with the setting sun. The first gray light of dawn seeped into the canyon, bringing an end to the shivering cold of the night, but revealing their desperate situation. The towering red walls, which had offered shelter in the darkness, now seemed to close in on them. They had been pushed into a box canyon, a dead end with nowhere left to run. Jake knew they could not outpace their pursuers much longer. The men on foot were getting closer. The crunch of their boots on gravel echoed faintly in the morning stillness. They needed a distraction, a way to turn the canyon's unique geography against their hunters. Jake looked up at the sheer sandstone cliffs that towered hundreds of feet above them. The smooth, curving surfaces were perfect natural amplifiers. An idea formed in his mind. "Leo," Jake whispered, pointing to a rugged, scalable ledge that led to a high vantage point overlooking a deep, shadowy fissure on the opposite side of the canyon floor. "I need you to climb up there. Move slowly and stay low. Do not let them see you." Leo nodded, his face determined despite his exhaustion. He left his pack behind and began the arduous climb, his fingers searching for holds in the abrasive rock. Wolf watched him ascend, whining softly but staying by Jake's side, as instructed. Once Leo reached the high ledge, he crouched behind a boulder and looked down at his father for the signal. Jake raised his hand and then dropped it sharply. Leo wrapped his arms around a large, heavy chunk of sandstone, resting near the edge. With a grunt of effort, he heaved it over the precipice. The silence of the morning was violently shattered. The heavy stone plummeted into the deep chasm below, striking the canyon floor with a deafening, booming crash. The sound did not stop there. It reverberated wildly off the canyon walls, multiplying and distorting into a chaotic cacophony of falling rock and sliding scree. To anyone listening nearby, it sounded exactly like a group of desperate people clumsily scrambling down a loose slope in a panic. The ruse worked instantly. Shouts erupted from the men on foot who were hidden around a bend. Confused by the echoing noise, they yelled to each other that the targets were breaking for the eastern ridge. The sounds of their hurried footsteps faded rapidly as they chased the false trail away from Jake's position. Jake peered cautiously around the edge of the rock face they were hiding behind. The area where the vehicles were parked was almost deserted. Only one man remained, the ringleader of the operation. He was standing next to a dusty pickup truck, looking toward the source of the noise but hesitating to leave the valuable cargo unattended. Jake scanned the interior of the truck through the windshield. There, resting on the passenger seat, was their only hope for salvation, a rugged black satellite phone. Jake moved with practiced stealth through the sparse sagebrush, keeping low to the ground. His eyes were fixed on the dusty pickup truck where the ringleader of the illegal operation stood waiting. The man was burly, with a sun-scarred neck and a nervous energy, constantly checking his watch. Wolf moved like a silver shadow beside Jake, his body low to the ground, every muscle coiled and ready for the command. When they were mere yards away, the slight crunch of Jake's boot on loose gravel betrayed their presence. The ringleader spun around, his eyes widening in alarm at the sight of the man and the large dog emerging from the canyon shadows. His hand dropped instinctively toward his belt, reaching quickly for a weapon concealed beneath his vest. "Wolf, hold!" Jake commanded, his voice cutting sharply through the desert silence. The Silver Sable German Shepherd launched himself forward, a blur of disciplined power. He covered the distance in seconds, but did not attack physically. Instead, Wolf executed a flawless maneuver, skidding to a halt exactly 6 feet from the man. He dropped into a low, threatening crouch, his powerful shoulders hunched and ready to spring. His lips peeled back to reveal formidable white teeth, and a rapid, thunderous barking erupted from his chest. It was a relentless wall of sound, a primal warning that promised immediate, devastating consequences for the slightest movement. The ringleader froze, his hand hovering uselessly inches from his belt. The sheer intensity of the large, angry dog, the controlled fury in those intelligent eyes, paralyzed him with terror. He dared not breathe, let alone draw his weapon against the threat facing him. While Wolf held the man transfixed in a bubble of fear, Jake sprinted to the truck's open window. He snatched the rugged black satellite phone from the passenger seat and retreated quickly to a safe distance behind a large boulder. His fingers fumbled slightly with adrenaline as he dialed the emergency frequency for the Bureau of Land Management. "This is an emergency," Jake spoke clearly into the device, ensuring the ringleader could hear him. "We have located an illegal antiquity excavation site in Echo Canyon. We require immediate assistance. I am transmitting our precise coordinates now." Hearing Jake read the location data over the phone, the ringleader's shoulders slumped in total defeat. The fight went out of him, and he slowly raised his hands in surrender, terrified of provoking the dog. Hours later, the rhythmic thumping of heavy rotor blades filled the canyon as a law enforcement helicopter descended, kicking up clouds of red dust. BLM rangers secured the site and the priceless crates of ancient pottery. Finally safe, Jake, Leo, and Wolf sat together on the lowered tailgate of a Ranger pickup truck, exhausted but relieved. Jake looked at the recovered historical treasures being cataloged by the officers, then put his arm around his son's shoulders. "Today, Leo," Jake said softly, his voice filled with pride, "you did not just learn history, you fought to protect it." Leo managed a tired smile. He leaned his head against Wolf's sturdy flank, wrapping his arms tightly around the loyal dog who had guarded them through the ordeal. Sometimes we chase after gold only to realize that the true treasure has been walking beside us all along. Wolf reminded us that when the world gets dark and cold, loyalty is the only light we need to find our way home. If this journey warmed your spirit, please leave a like and subscribe to help us tell more stories like this. We would love to read about your own four-legged protectors in the comments below. To keep the adventure going, simply click the video appearing on your screen now and let us discover the next mystery together.